Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening today. Today, I have Annie Goodrow with me today. Annie's a nutritionist, and she's here to talk about a really important topic that faces all of us in midlife, and that is our diet and nutrition. As our hormonal cocktail shifts during perimenopause, and then we come out with a different hormonal cocktail in postmenopause, lots of things can happen in our body. And often the food that we eat and drink doesn't work for us so well anymore. Also, during that time, our body's doing a lot of work as it's coping with this deep change in our body, this deep change in our endocrine system. And our endocrine system is the deepest system in our body, and it really drives a whole lot of our other body systems, giving them little messages and telling them what to do. So thank you so much for being with me here today, Annie.
Thank you for having me, Kelly. This is going to be fun.
I think it will be too. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because you've got such an interesting midlife transition story yourself in terms of, making a big change. And I have been speaking to a lot of ladies in the last 12 months who have made big midlife transitions and have found themselves really finding work that is meaningful and purposeful. And when I say purposeful, I mean allowing them to be their most authentic selves. And I think your story is one in that vein as well.
Yes, I like to say that I was a very late bloomer. So my first career, was one that found me. It's not like I had this big desire for it. It was the time and the place, and I wanted to work.
Mm.
I I could not wait to be working, actually. And it was a great opportunity. And I started in the branding and design world, and it was a wonderful path. And making this a very short story, I found myself becoming a runner and an endurance athlete, and discovered that this just brought me so much joy. But not only did it bring me joy, but I realized, oh my God, I finally understand when people talk about finding a vocation. I
Yeah.
was like, this is what I want to do. I want to work in this world. And of course, it's a very wide world. So I went back to school, in my perimenopause years, even though I had no idea that I was in my perimenopause world. And went back to school, became a nutritionist. And I did that part time while I was, working full time in my own business, and did the transition, over a number of years. So until I could pay my bills, essentially. So,
Great. So now
fun.
full-time nutrition and loving it.
Yes, nutritionist. And I speak a lot. I do a lot of work with corporations, and I have my private practice as well.
Great. That's such a good story. And you really got into running and you are an incredible athlete. Um, and you've done a lot of marathons and I think ultra tries. That's right. Yeah, the ultra triathlon.
What you're thinking about are Ironman. So I have done
Oh,
marathons and Ironman triathlons. Yes, just for a little bit more
amazing.
pain.
Amazing. Did you always do that or did that start sort of
No,
midlife? Is that a midlife thing as well?
the running started my mid 30s, and
Mm,
then Ironman started in my 40s. And I actually believe that these ultra endurance type events, which Ironman is also part of, it's actually very well suited for older athletes because it
okay.
takes an enormous amount of mental fortitude.
Yes.
And, of course, when you're 25, maybe you'll be able to run faster, but just getting through the training and then the event, you need a lot of maturity. And we are well suited in our 40s coming into our own.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And you just need the fortitude to keep on going, don't you? The sort of to it's the grind, like the capacity. It's almost like the
Yeah.
confidence to know that you do have um was talking to a client the other day and I said, you're stronger than you realize.
Yeah. It's a lot of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And I had none at 25. I had zero self-awareness. But
I don't
at
think
40,
any of us do. I don't know. I think I was pretty clueless as well. But anyway.
yeah, I really was clueless. I took the prize for that. And I think that at 45, what happened is that I had a lot more knowledge about myself. My years in marathoning also helped
Yeah.
because I got to know how, what I'm made of. I also was confronted with my own, my own stuff. Everybody's got a little bit of stuff to deal with.
We
So
do.
it,
Yeah.
and a lot of our own nonsense, right? Things that we make up
Yeah.
that, you know, for all kinds of reasons. And as um as Armin, training took place and so on, I had accumulated so much knowledge in my marathon days that it really helped because there were some very tough times. There were some, I like to call them the dark clouds. The dark clouds came in and I was like, what am I doing here? Why am I spending my time doing this? Everybody around me is doing, cocktails on a patio. And here I am, trying to do a run when it's bloody hot out there. Like,
Yeah.
like there are many moments where you are going to be tested.
Yeah.
But I am so grateful for that experience because there is no way that I could be where I am now with my business without having done marathoning and Ironman.
Yeah. What do you think when you say that? What were the life skills, or as you reflect, like what did it teach you?
I got to know who I am
Mm,
through it. Right? There is nowhere to hide when you are on a 35-kilometer run,
mm,
right? 20 miles for our imperial system friends. Um, there is nowhere to hide. You have to take full responsibility for yourself. And this was really important, right? That I had realizing that I was responsible for my happiness. I was also responsible for my misery,
yeah.
and that I had to take responsibility for all of it,
Mm,
the good, the bad, and the ugly.
mm.
And when you think about health, you do need to take responsibility.
Absolutely. Yes. And so many of us project that responsibility onto the health system. Like it should be responsible for us, but it starts with us, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It takes, it takes the moment when we say, um, this is where I am at this
Mm,
point in time. What happened, happened. But all I have is now in order to make a decision that will impact, potentially every single day for the rest of my life.
yeah.
So that responsibility, that moment where we go, I'm committed to me and to be doing this for myself. Um, it's incredible what can happen. So
Yeah.
taking responsibility for me was a big, big thing. I had a very traumatic childhood,
Yes.
and I ran from that, figuratively, and just buried myself in work and thought, well, this is the way to get through, was to white knuckle my way through, the
Hmm.
corporate world. And,
Hmm.
there's only whatever you resist persists, as the expression goes.
Yeah. Well, I think also one thing I say to a lot of clients, and we have our different life transitions. It's like if you
Yes.
don't sort it out, it's going to hang around to the next one. So, if
Yep.
you don't sort out what's coming up for healing now in your midlife journey, it'll be there in your 60s as you transition into elderhood, right? So, I don't know, like to me, physical health is mental health and mental health is physical health. Like they're interconnected. You can't actually, because the body mind is one and you can't separate it out. And, diet, nutrition is such a big part of that. There's a Australian professor at Deakin University, which is not far from Melbourne, where I am, Felice Jacka, and she is big in nutritional psychology, and she's done so much research around the impact of diet on mental health. And
Oh,
it's very, very clear, like she's done
huge.
massive amounts of research that it has a significant impact on our mental health.
Yes. When we separate the head, the heart from the rest of the body, right? Emotional health, mental health, from
Yeah,
physical health. That's when we get into trouble.
that's
It is
exactly right.
all one. It is all one. And I love that you talk about that because I have such a crush on nutritional psychiatry and all of the knowledge that we now, and I am no psychiatrist, but I have read many books now with all of the science
Yeah,
of that we know of direct, not causation, but correlation
yeah,
between our food, our lifestyle, and our mood and how we feel about ourselves.
yeah. And I have, as you know, I do a lot of trauma resolution work, experiencing somatic coaching. Um, so often I come across addiction, because
Yeah.
addiction is a way that people try and regulate themselves through whatever substance or activity. Like it can be also like shopping can be addictive or gambling and things like that. But
Working.
with food, and particularly I see this in midlife women, and I know you're going to be able to talk a lot about just as we go in, how people use certain substances, which I know cause a lot of issues in terms of physical symptoms. And if you're listening, I'm saying this with bunny inverted commas in my fingers. Um, but then they're using that food to regulate their nervous system. So caffeine to bring themselves up and get some adrenaline in the morning, and then alcohol to bring in some like letdown because their nervous system's not able to do it, and they don't have the skills in terms of somatic exercises, or even, you and I both use exercise as a regulatory tool because we both love exercise, but just don't have whatever those life skills are. And then also there's the numbing out and disassociation we get from a carb fest. So I know myself when I'm tuning into myself if I'm having a bit of a rough time, because I don't eat, like when I say carbs, I mean like white bread and, heavy,
Yeah,
heavy. Not because carbs are lots of food. Vegetables are carbohydrates as well.
exactly.
But
We don't feed on broccoli when we
y-
feel that way.
yeah, we don't kind of, yeah. So I remember, I'll just tell this story and then we'll keep going. But I had a friend pass away last year, and she'd had cancer, so I knew it was happening. And I was very sad. She'd been in palliative care for a while, and I found myself, I sort of had a bit of a cry when I got the news one morning when I woke up. She'd passed away that early that morning, and then I couldn't, like, I stopped crying. It was really weird. I was like, "Nyeh," like my body went, oh, that's weird. And then later that afternoon, I found myself craving toast. I'm not
Yeah.
a big toast eater. I used to be in my 20s, but not so much now. And I thought, like, do I actually need carbs, or is this me not tuning into my grief? So I said to my husband, can we go for a walk? Because we were both working from home. He's like, yeah, sure. So we went for a walk. It was sort of end of summer, and we went up to a park and we were walking around our bare feet in the grass. And I said to him, I'm craving carbs. And I got a decaf coffee because I love the taste of coffee, but I can't,
Mm.
one of my perimenopause things, can't drink coffee anymore. The caffeine really does my body in. And
Yes.
I said to him, I because I had cancer a few years before her, and I said, I'm so sad that she died, but there's a part of me that also feels relieved that it's not me, and I feel guilty and I feel ashamed about feeling that. And he
Sure.
said, yeah, I feel the same. And then when I said that, then I could cry. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, how interesting is, and this is often the case, how shame and guilt can block us from feeling and just moving in the way that we need to. And this is what I
Absolutely.
deal with clients all the time. Yeah. Because that's trauma, often the trauma spiral is shame. And so
Yeah.
it was interesting to me. And I share that with clients because when we have a lot of carbs like that, it helps us disassociate from our body.
Yes, absolutely. We are numbing,
Numbing
numbing,
out.
numbing,
Yeah.
right? And we often do it without even the awareness of where is this coming from? We just go, oh, I just had a craving and
Yeah. So
off I go.
can we talk about, you know, the midlife transition and perimenopause and what happens for a lot of people? Because a lot of us are, you know, find that we have to give up drinking or caffeine like me or, you know, whatever to cope. Like, you know, for some people it's comes down to they don't sleep well when they're
Ooh.
eating that food. And no one wants that, do they? And then some people they have maybe hot flushes or something like that. But food, what I learned during the transition, and you I know you can speak for hours about this, is it's it's such a good support. Nutrition is such a good support during this transition if you
Yeah,
hook into it and pay attention to what's going in.
for sure. So, let's just talk about what happens,
Yeah.
right? At the beginning of this transition, where we actually call it perimenopause, right? The pre-menopause. The perimenopause is when the estrogen and progesterone are now starting to oscillate, not in
Mm,
their normal rhythm, but now we are starting to see these massive fluctuation, right? This
mm,
is hormone party time, absolutely random, and which is what explains why some symptoms occur and then can disappear.
mm,
So we are in this phase that can last up to 7 to 10 years. So many women are in perimenopause without knowing it.
yeah.
Estrogen is not just a sexual hormone. We have not been educated as women to, have a toolkit, right? We talk about puberty and what's going to happen, and we teach our girls. And then there's pregnancy, the other big hormonal tsunami that happens to women.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of education there in terms of impact, et cetera. But when it comes to midlife and menopause, it's like this giant vortex. It's like,
Mm,
a whole bunch of nonsense now, which we see on, social media.
yeah.
So estrogen has an impact on a woman's body in absolutely every single system,
Mm,
because we actually have estrogen receptors throughout our entire body from head to toe. So it affects our brain, it affects our cardiovascular capacity, it affects our digestion, our nervous system. It impacts how we are going to now digest food. This is the big hint around, the weight gain, and also
mm,
sometimes even acid reflux for some women,
yeah.
right? Where we go, oh my God, I used to be able to have coffee, now I can't. And it's funny, I had the same. It's also muscle and bones. Of course, we're very familiar with the whole risk of osteoporosis following menopause, but it's a full contact sport, menopause.
Yeah.
So we can have massive impact of mental health, emotional health, right? Depression. The statistic that I was rereading actually today is 20% of women in perimenopause will have depression symptoms and
Mm,
anxiety, right? That's a
mm.
lot. That's a lot because it also manifests in so many ways in our lives.
Yeah, I actually read some stats last year or yeah, no, it was end of last year that the suicide rates, I was looking at OEC data, um, in first world countries is highest between 45 and 55 for females.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, I believe it. Yeah, I'm not up to speed with those statistics, but that makes sense. So, women are experiencing this, and it can be fatigue, can be a lack of motivation, it can be sadness, being irritable, right? Or my favorite, anger, right? I have clients who come in and they go, "Oh my God, I have some moments I just want to scream at everyone."
mm,
Just, so it impacts women significantly. And menopause itself, just so that we have clarity and everyone that is listening, is only one day in time, right? It's the
one
day
day.
that follows
Yeah.
12 missed periods, 12 missed menstrual cycles, and voila, right? You are officially in the menopause kingdom, and you will be a postmenopausal woman for the rest of your life, right?
Mm,
And then the progesterone and estrogen levels have now finally diminished and are now flat, unless somebody chooses to have, of course, menopause hormone therapy. But naturally speaking, that is what happens. Testosterone is still there, but really descends on a very gentle slope,
Yeah.
right? But takes even further time to decrease even further. So that is what happens, right? So we have this entire experience that is mental, emotional, and physical.
And cultural too, don't you think? Like, because I think estrogen, one thing I find really kind of humorous and curious about estrogen is its soothing effect when we have lots of it. And I sometimes think, it gives us rose-colored glasses. And sometimes we let stuff go that maybe we shouldn't have in the past. And um, yeah, I think that's where a lot of anger comes about. But what I notice with a lot of people, and it's also developmentally part of the shift at midlife, is they can't, like, you can't unsee what you can now see when the soothing effects of estrogen go away. and
Yes.
and then so that for a lot of people is their belief system. So it's almost like, because you're going through this, it is an existential crisis, because your end of fertility is over. So with that comes an identity change, because that's what hormones do. They facilitate our development throughout our life, right? So
Exactly.
we still have those younger parts within us, but now we are stepping into another part of life. And a lot of women, I notice, are sort of more focused, and rightly so, about the bigger picture issues and things that they're passionate about, which is really great. Um, but you look at a lot of the cultural messaging that you've been receiving for years, like, and the anti-aging is one that I notice in a lot of people, and you like, this is rubbish.
Yeah. Yes. I mean,
And
this could
that can cause dissonance, right? Like there's a period of, I'm sure you've seen this, of like kind of confusion of like, is this right? Am I seeing this? Yes, what
yes.
you're saying is
I,
right.
I love that you're bringing this up because, we rightly focus on, our modalities of food and movement and rest, and all of these things are extremely important. But one thing that is proven is that our attitude and mindset in regards to what menopause is as an
Yeah,
experience and aging is going to significantly
significantly
impact
impact. Yeah,
our experience of it, right? And in a way, it's a bit of a, oh, of course. Yet, when you live, I live in North America, right, where we are the most, ageist part of the world, in my opinion, right? We revere Botox, and it's hard to get dermatologist appointments now because everybody's getting fillers and stuff like that. Um, of course, you may look at this transition, and I hear this all the time. Annie, I am too young for this. I am too young for this, right? We are protecting our youth.
yeah,
So this attitude is really, really important, because to acknowledge, because it is going to affect how we are going to be proceeding through this transition.
yeah. I mean, I could tell you so many stories of like clients, but also just walking around the streets here, like people know what I do. This is going on. I'm like, you're probably perimenopause. I'm too young for that. How old are you? 45. No, you're right on time. Actually, really? Yes, you're right
Oh,
on
the
time.
bitter bad news that you are.
Yeah, but also I think it's, like, to your point, I think it's really, and I'd be curious what you notice, but in the last 5 years, there's heaps more information than there was
Yes.
previously. Like, I think I started perimenopause when I was about 43, and I knew something was up. So I started reading about it. It wasn't
Mm.
that easy to find a lot of stuff. That was
No,
10
no,
years
there's
ago. Yeah. It's really in the last
absolutely.
5, isn't it, that it's become like, I think it's our generation too that are like speaking out, and people like
Yes.
you and I working in this space saying, no, this is not good enough. We need to do
No, finally asking for, the the support that we are owed, right?
Yes.
Because I often remind people this is not a disease. This is a
No.
natural fact of life,
Yeah.
right? It's not diabetes, it's not Alzheimer's. It is a natural thing. It is, in fact, women's brains, which are very much affected by menopause, right,
Mhm.
are the least funded research wise in all of anatomy, all physiology combined, right? Dr. Mosconi, which just
Yes.
released her
A book.
menopause,
It's very good. Yeah.
when she wrote that, when I read it, I was incensed. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. But it is. We thank goodness that we are speaking up, that we are getting angry, because we need to, this needs to be heard. Certainly, in Canada, we're never in the front, in the front row. We're followers, right? Which is where I am based. But I see a lot of what's being done in the UK, and I am
Yeah.
highly encouraged, right? There are some much stronger movements there. And in the US, of course, it took celebrities to make this happen, because
Yes. Yeah.
that's how
Yeah. Yeah.
that's how
That's
they
how it
roll.
works. That's how they roll. Yeah. I mean, I
We
would say here we had a big Senate inquiry that's going on at the moment around women's health. And they made a call for papers to be submitted sort of between November last year and Feb. So I wrote a paper, mostly focused on like mental health trauma, because that's, what I'm dealing with a lot of people. But yeah, and just it was really interesting and it was very open. You could sort of write whatever you want. But my big thing was around how, like, there's a lot of shame around this stigma. And sorry, a lot of shame and stigma around this transition. And
Yeah.
it needs a rebrand. So you need to do some public health communication work, helping people understand what this is, because it impacts them in every aspect of their life, let alone the economic impact of supposedly 1 in 5 women leaving the workforce. But I think also a lot of women, to your point around kind of waking up, like, coming back to the truth of who they are, doing
Yes.
work like you're doing, making shifts, doing work that they're really passionate about. So I think a lot of people, there's a large percentage of people that go like, oh, actually, I don't want to do the corporate grind anymore. I want to do this, and work that they're
Yeah.
passionate about. So that's really good.
There's definitely an awakening, right? To
Yeah.
your point, there is definitely
Yeah.
an awakening that is happening, a beautiful awakening. One of the US doctors that I really like, she talks about how, welcome to your no nonsense years, right? Like this is when, we are, I think, stronger in terms of using our voice
Yeah.
and putting some boundaries, right? And
Yeah.
that is, I'm not going to take this stuff anymore. I don't want to be part of this rat race and be stressed out all the time and have all these GI issues because I am like, so crazy stressed, and also, drinking
Yeah.
alcohol because I need to, soothe myself. Like there's a lot of people who feel that at this time, this, it is an awakening and shedding layers, if you want, which I
Yeah.
love. I love the, you know,
Letting go. Yeah. Well, it's also, I think, the first half of our adult life is very defined by our ego, developmentally, rightly so.
yes,
And it's about establishing ourselves, whether it's career or family or everything. And so then the second half of your life is about being yourself. And sometimes, as I said to a client last night, sometimes we spend the second half of our life undoing the harm that was caused in the first half of our lives. So,
yes,
so in what do you think? What are the sort of 4 or 5? There may be more typical foods that seem to impact people negatively the most when they're going through perimenopause. So we talked about caffeine. Like I said, caffeine's been terrible. It was terrible for me, and once I stopped that, everything sort of. But there's some people find other things as well. What do you observe in your practice that
well,
significantly impacts people?
and basically all of the empty foods, right? The very ultra processed foods, right?
Yeah.
Things that are so denatured, there's nothing left. And all
Yes.
that there's left is sugar. All of the big fried foods that we all love, they're so compelling, but very, very damaging as well.
Yes.
And just all of that excess sugar, whatever form it takes, you know, alcohol included, but
Yeah.
all of that is really messing us up. It
Yeah.
messes up cortisol, messes up the sleep. It's already a period of transition where we can be experiencing these things normally. So
Mm,
really, it can really just like completely, it's like this domino effect that then causes chaos. You feel bad, you can't think straight,
mm,
you're gaining weight because all of these are pretty unforgiving. Not the metabolism, but the processing of carbs is actually also impeded because the decreased estrogen is impacting insulin, unfortunately. So we become
yes.
more resistant, right? This is like a little domino effect. So
So is this why a lot of people become pre-diabetic or get diagnosed with diabetes type 2 at this point is because of the impact on insulin? Can you
yeah.
talk a little about that just to help people understand?
Yeah, so insulin often is looked at as a bad guy. Insulin is a very good hormone that our body produces in a very smart way,
Mhm.
right? So when we eat carbohydrates, they digest in other glucose and the fiber, that goes to the gut. Starch is another fancy word for lots of sugar.
Yeah,
So it's sugar and fiber. That sugar is really important for the body to feed itself, right? Every single cell in our
the cells.
body,
Yeah,
the brain, right? The billions and trillions, the trillions of cells that we have require sugar in the form of glucose molecule. But that glucose doesn't enter the cell on its own. It actually requires insulin it's like your little travel companion, and
mhm.
it takes it. And then in the cell, there's a little insulin receptor, and it says, hello, yes, please, we'd love some glucose, because of course, that is the food. And we're like a dog, happy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We get that beautiful glucose in there, and then the cell has that glucose, and what does it do? It gives it energy to perform the tasks that it has to perform, right? Whether it's a brain cell, a cell in your heart, in your muscles, right? All of that. With the declining levels of estrogen, what we've discovered is that it slows down the effectiveness of the insulin. So what happens is that so that little glucose is now arriving and is like, okay, take me, take me, take me, because it cannot enter on its own. Remember, we need the insulin. And the decreased estrogen has now made insulin, let's just call it lazy, right?
Ah,
And it cannot enter the cell. So it floats. And of course, we know that blood sugar levels are a finely regulated thing. So all of that excess glucose that cannot be used is stored, and it's stored as fat. So
yeah,
that makes us eat because we don't want that to happen. It also affects our ability. Now it takes more insulin to do the job, right? And then so the
yeah,
pancreas is like, oh my God, I'm going to produce more.
yeah,
And this is when we get in trouble,
yes.
because this inefficiency makes us what we call insulin resistant.
Done.
That is leads to pre-diabetic first, and then full-on diabetes.
Mhm.
So it leads to other issues. And this is why it's so important for us to be talking about this, because it leads to cholesterol issues. It
Yes,
leads to triglyceride issues,
yes.
right? Our
It's the
heart, it's
it's all the metabolic health, isn't it?
absolutely, this is what we call syndrome X, right? It's a collection of issues that are all tied to one thing and one thing only, and it is our ability to metabolize sugar. So sugar is not evil. Insulin is
Mm,
not evil, which is why women need to make changes at menopause in order to compensate for this metabolic shift.
Yes. So is it more fruit and vegetables and cutting out the processed food? Like what is the general shift if you would just in broad brushstrokes? Because of course we're all individual, aren't we? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So not everybody reacts the same way, right? You and I could be eating the same meal and
Mm,
look at our blood sugar levels, and you would have one reading and I would have a different one.
hmm
I think that that's important for people to know this, because sometimes there are some broad statements made out there and it makes it sound like we all react the same way. That's not true. However, it is true that we need to up our fiber.
hmm
Absolutely, we need to increase the fiber. So fiber only comes from the plant world. So
hmm
we're looking at vegetables, we're looking at more fruit, we're looking at more real whole grains, not denatured grains or ultra refined grains, right?
hmm
We're looking at legumes that are also really good for us in terms of fiber content. So that's a very helpful thing, decreasing these ultra refined carbs. You know, I love my baguettes. I am French Canadian after all, but I have to be careful because it doesn't like me anymore, or it doesn't love
Yeah.
me as it used to, right? So things like that will really help. Increasing our protein so that we can also help metabolically to slow down the absorption of sugar. So when we eat carbs with protein and a little bit of healthy fats, we actually slow down this impact of glucose. So we don't want, you know, it's like when those fire hydrant and you open it and the water flow is massive.
Yeah.
That's what happens when we only eat carbs and without fiber, right? It's this
Yeah.
big, huge amount. So imagine the insulin is like, what is happening? I don't have an opportunity here to do my job.
I'm just thinking about that as you're talking in my head. Because I always think of the nervous system response all the time, given my training. But
Mm,
doesn't like if you ate a heavy pasta meal, for example, the body would take some time to process that, would it not? As opposed to vegetables and a bit of protein. Because what I'm thinking about is often when people have a carb, say you have a big, heavy pasta meal, and then you go to
yes.
bed, and then often people will wake up at like 2 or 3 in the morning because they've got all this energy. Whereas I
Yeah.
know that if you eat protein and vegetables, just say you had steak and broccoli, just for example,
Yeah.
then it usually takes about 4 hours. And then most people, so if you like, I always try and eat dinner at about 6. So I know when I
Yeah.
go to bed at 10, I'm not going to be like feeling, ugh, I hate going to bed feeling full and yucky.
Absolutely.
Um, so that's entering into the bloodstream earlier. Is that correct? Have I got that right?
Yes. Yes, the body doesn't digest things all at the same rhythm, right?
Yeah,
So the fastest thing are carbohydrates, right? So
yeah,
the refined carbohydrates that don't have any fiber, they digest like this, right? They enter the blood system, big spike.
yeah,
Now, carbohydrates are also, as we pointed out before, vegetables. So
yeah,
if I have a pasta that has, let's say, broccoli and onions,
yeah,
and I've decided that I was going to add some chicken for a little bit of pound of protein, suddenly this spike is no longer going to be really high. It's actually going to be, first of all, slower. It's going to be over more time,
hmm
and it's going to definitely not spike as much. So those are tricks in terms of how we can help the body, right?
mm,
Does it help to eliminate those big sources of carbs that basically don't have much refined, much nutrition in them? Absolutely. Absolutely. But protein and fat digest slowly.
yeah,
Um, at 3 or 4 times more, I'm not saying this properly, enter the bloodstream in such a slower way as
yeah.
well.
Not the
And
intensity. It's a bit more kind of drawn out and yeah,
exactly, and fat doesn't trigger insulin at all. So
yeah,
when people say, oh, fat makes you fat, they don't understand chemistry. Like
yeah, yeah.
that's not the so for insulin, it's really a carb and a protein story.
Yeah, okay. And what about the stomach hormones, leptin and ghrelin? What happens to them when the sex hormones start to do their merry dance?
Yes. So what we do know is a couple of things. In our 40s, we actually start to decrease in terms of even the gastric juices, which
Yeah.
are helping with the digestion, right?
Yeah.
And this drop varies amongst individual, right? We don't know why. It just happens. And this is a normal fact of the aging process. Okay. So we know that the digestion starts to be a little bit, for some individuals, compromised as early as our 40s, right?
Mm,
And some women really kind of start to go, oh my goodness, this is really impacting me. The satiety and hunger hormones are also highly fluctuating because when you're not digesting properly, you are starting to really mess up that whole cycle,
yeah. Okay.
right? So you can actually feel that you're really hungry because the body is not metabolizing the food, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
some women say, oh my God, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm always hungry.
Yeah. I actually found that I have to eat, well, as you said, a lot more protein than I had previously.
Yeah,
And
good.
so I started counting my macros,
Yes.
and that has been really helpful to me. Like I feel better. Um, I'm obviously more, not that I'm a pretty conscious eater anyway, but I probably was under eating protein. So I've
Yeah.
had to eat, and I do a lot of exercise like you. So I've had to eat more. And also to just sort of, I had a little app that I used, like, oh, actually, because I'm doing all this exercise, I have to eat a lot more than I realized I needed.
Yes, and this is one thing. This is why I gave all my clients a protein guide. It is surprising how, it takes a lot more food in the
Yeah,
protein category than we normally thought. And it's interesting because all of the guidelines now, as science is coming forth, are increasing the protein content. The good news
really.
is that it brings a lot of good, consistent energy throughout the day, right? So
Yes, definitely.
we're a lot less up and down, and we all benefit from being less subject to these big fluctuations because those are hard on us, right? They're hard on our ability to
Mm.
concentrate, to be creative, to remain calm and resilient.
Yeah, I think you're right because I know when I don't eat enough protein at lunchtime, I get like that 3 p.m. slump, that tiredness slump.
Oh yeah, guaranteed.
Yeah, but
Yes,
when I do, I'm fine. I kind of go through
exactly.
till probably 4:30, take a break, and then if I don't have a client at like 5:30, which I often do at night, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll finish now, and hadn't really even thought about it. But if
Yeah.
not, I had a boss years ago when I worked in corporate world, and he used to get sleepy at 3 o'clock every day,
Mhm.
really sleepy. But now I know why.
Yes, absolutely. Right.
Because
His nutrition not
yeah,
adequate.
yeah, and obviously, I mean, men don't have menopause, but their hormones are in decline at a sort of more reasonable pace than what we experience at midlife. But still, they're experiencing it as well, aren't they?
But metabolically, it is the same process for them, right?
Yeah.
Carbs, proteins, fat, the insulin process. They may not have our extra challenge of insulin resistance, but they are subject to the same issue.
Mm, so interesting. And so, really, the other thing I've noticed is a lot of people get really addicted to sugar. And I guess there's sugar, a lot of sugar in alcohol. So, if you're soothing with that, and there's a tendency for us to just like go hardcore, a lot of us, and cut
Yes.
stuff out. And I always say to, from a nervous system perspective, I'm like, we have our natural patterns are expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction. And so that's a massive contraction for your body. And
Yes.
is it going to be too hard? Like, can you taper it? And so I'm sort of thinking out loud and tell me if I'm on the right track. Rather than going hardcore on the cut, would you change the way you're eating? So maybe, for example, would you eat your vegetables first, then protein and a bit of carbs? And then if you are trying to wean off sugar, you might just have a little bit at the end of the meal and then slowly wean yourself off that way rather than cutting it out altogether. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I am not a big fan of the all or nothing approach.
Yeah,
Cutting entire food groups, I don't think is a smart idea. It's
yeah,
also not something that for 99% of human beings is sustainable.
doesn't work.
So yeah, right. So I don't want to give people tools that are not sustainable, right? And this is why people get caught because people will be like, oh, but they gave up bread and sugar, and let's say, and dairy, and they lost all that weight, and they're excited, and I understand, but it is never sustainable, right? So
Yeah,
what we do is things that are sustainable. And there are strategies. Like I love pasta. As I said, I love my baguette. But when I do have pasta, 100% of the time, it will have protein. So whether it's meatballs, whether it's seafood, whether it's chicken, it
yeah.
could have. Well, I don't do really pasta with tofu, but I would do rice with tofu,
Hmm.
right? And I would have vegetables, so lots of fiber, and that will really absorb the shock of carbohydrates of the pasta, for example. I'm also more conscientious now about how much of those I eat. Right in my 20s, I had like massive bowls. I had no awareness. Now I'm like a little bit more protein, Annie, a little less pasta.
Yeah, yeah. I hear you. Yeah.
So I think that there are some strategies, definitely. When it comes to sugar and oh, I'm only gonna have one cookie, this is where it gets a little bit more tricky. So it is very hard for the brain, as you know, right? The way we
Yes.
are wired,
You
you
can't
know,
discern. Yeah.
exactly. Oh, I'm just gonna have one cookie. I am only going to have it's like bag of chips, right? It's an old joke, right? You cannot open the bag without finishing it, right? There is such a addictive element. So I always talk about dessert should not be eliminated from your life. Like I'm more of a salty person, so I
Mm,
love I love a good bowl of popcorn, but I am mindful of when I am going to have it. So it is often a Saturday night. It's a tradition here, right? We do a movie or there's something else, and popcorn is a celebration,
yeah.
right? And then I enjoy it. I fully enjoy it. There is no resentment. There is no judging myself.
Yeah. It's your
But
cheat day.
when we're done, we're done.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, um, do you think people don't eat as much fruit as they used to? Because I know, like, I'm thinking about a couple of 100 years ago, like, people would have got their sugar hit from fruit, wouldn't they? Before
I
we had
think it's
processed food. Yeah. It's
yeah,
cultural. Yeah. Okay.
very cultural, and I think that it varies a lot through time.
Yeah.
You know, fruit was always very seasonal,
Yeah.
even for climates that are tropical, where people have a lot access to a lot of mangoes and overall a lot of fruit. Um, Nowadays, what's happened is that we've also taken fruit into fruit juices and all kinds of different formats, which is getting us into trouble again. There
Yeah.
is fundamentally nothing wrong with fruit. It contains a ton of fiber, right? Fructose, is not an evil thing. It is digested by the liver. It is an extra step, right? It is not glucose,
Yeah.
which digests very quickly. Fructose needs to go through the liver. This is a slow process,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't have all of the damaging things as long as fiber is there to help.
Yeah.
Fiber is this big mesh that slows down that
Everything down.
big,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So I often recommend, if you enjoy fruit, which I do, I love pears and peaches, especially when they come fresh, and it's a very short season here. But I really enjoy it, and I always say, have it after your meal.
Yes,
Then
that's what I'm thinking instead of the sweet. I mean, in
it
Australia, we have no excuse because the top half of the country is tropical. So you can pretty much get fruit the whole year round. Um,
yes,
and everything really, apart from like, sorry, I'm just moving because my head's in the
yes.
sun. The yeah, pears and things like that that are very seasonal, the stone fruits, they come, when they come and they grow in a certain part. But all the tropical fruits you can get all year. Um, so yeah, there's no reason why we can't be eating them, which is a little
No,
different in North America because you're a lot colder. So
yes. Yeah.
yeah,
And our food comes, a lot of our food comes imported. So
yeah,
it's good to take advantage of it when it is fresh. And after a meal, it's a great strategy filled with antioxidants, vitamins. There is, like it's not an awful thing. We just
yeah.
have to watch with pesticides with certain things.
Yeah, and I've seen, as I've watched friends, and there's like you, and there's a couple of other ladies globally that I know that are working in this space to help us understand that food, like I said, food is medicine, and it can actually support you if you eat highly nutritional food throughout the transition. And even some of my good friends who have really embarked on it and have had sugar addictions and things like that. And they had put on a lot of weight, and then they get really focused on their diet, work with a nutritionist like you. The weight drops off, they feel better, they're more confident, they're getting out, they've got better energy. Their eyes
Oh,
are so clear. Like the
yes.
the the eyes, it's been amazing how powerful this is as a strategy that's just like an essential part of being a human to
Yes.
support you. And so, the more that we move away from what is natural, it kind of, I don't like to use this word, but it dehumanizes us a little bit, but it's doing a lot of damage on the inside. And so, just the simple, nutritious stuff is what is so powerful and so effective, isn't it?
Totally. If we were not really interested in nutrition before, midlife is the
The
time
time to
to
learn.
finally put our needs first. There could have been other needs, there could have been the family needs, and we're trying to accommodate X, Y, and Z. This is the time to really focus on, our fiber, our protein intake, right? To put in us what makes us feel good as well, because
Yeah,
it's what you describe, right? Like the weight goes, the symptoms diminish because
they
it also helps,
disappear.
they disappear or they diminish significantly. And suddenly you're like, oh my God, I feel good in my body. I feel good.
I've got energy. I can go and exercise. And
Exactly.
actually, I have noticed with a couple of clients who I've been working with where there's a lot of trauma there, but I've said go and work with a nutritionist. The 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 heavy periods went away as well when
Yeah.
they really focused on their diet and they rested. They made sure that they built rest into their day and they changed how they exercise. So maybe not going as hard as they used to. Everything kind of sorted itself out. And I heard one nutritionist in Melbourne that I know said recently, if you get the nutrition and diet part right, that's 50% of the equation. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's very fair.
Yeah.
That's very fair. Absolutely. It is, if you think about how your body depends on, the food that we give it is basically either quality fuel or shit fuel,
Yeah.
right? And if it doesn't have anything to work with, if it gets none of the amino acids, none of the vitamins, none of the minerals, it will struggle. It will, and we exacerbate all of the symptoms that are coming in,
Yeah.
right? We're not supporting the body at all. So I know a lot of women get frustrated with menopause, and I'm like, okay, one way to, lessen this frustration is to support yourself, right?
Yes.
With food. So I
Yeah.
think 50% is pretty reasonable. Now, I think that it's also fair to also acknowledge that everyone's journey of menopause is unique,
It's so unique. It's so
right? So
unique.
some women suffer more. We also know by ethnicity that some ethnicities are far more likely to have diabetes, for example, right?
Yeah.
Because, so that's important also because some uh, uh our uniqueness is also important to take into consideration in what that journey is going to be like.
Yeah, without a doubt. That's same, but different, or same, different, different. Like it's
Yeah.
just a different permutation and combination for every individual person going through it. And um, yeah, the body speaks to you, right? So she speaks through symptoms, or she speaks through the emotional expression, or the anxiety and depression. And it's not just your hormonal system, it's your nervous system. It's all the systems in your body are impacted because they all work together. But it's the endocrine and nervous system that seem to be significantly impacted a lot of the time, which makes sense, really,
Yeah, your body is constantly talking to you.
all the time.
And whether we decide to listen or not is another question. But
Yeah, but we haven't been taught to listen.
no, exactly. Oh my God.
Have not
Totally.
been taught to listen. And like at the start of the conversation, when we were talking about the body mind, someone said to me the other day, which I was explaining how somatic work works, and they're like, "Oh, it sounds a bit woo-woo." And I said, "Well, yeah, it could be, but actually, the thing that I think is the most woo-woo is that we've been taught that the body and the mind are not connected.
Oh my God.
To me, that's the
That's
most woo-woo thing in the world. So all we're doing is just teaching you skills to observe what's already there,
yes.
what's
Well,
already
and
happening."
when people say woo woo, because I also get sometimes a little bit like, "Ooh, okay, this is a little too out there for me." But somatic has been proven. Like we know physiologically, how the brain communicates with the gut and the heart,
Correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? This
Way
this
more information. There's 80% more information that goes from the body to the brain than the other way.
exactly. So we now know this. There's nothing woo woo. It's there. It's happening.
Yeah.
It's no different than your lungs expand and then they contract. Like it is a known fact. We know about these things, right?
Yeah.
So there's many things we don't understand, and we need to leave a space for openness, curiosity. But there are also many things that we do know, and we need to catch up because there's so much juice there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great time to learn midlife, really. It's a huge learning curve, isn't it?
Yes, it's one that is an opportunity if we choose
Yeah.
to know ourselves again.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah, really believe that.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. How can people find you, Annie? Can you tell us the website? And you've definitely got Instagram or other social media that you have.
Yes, of course, 21st century, we must be everywhere. But the website where I would encourage people to come to, because there's a lot of resources and a button to book a call with me,
Yeah.
complimentary. I understand there's hours, but we'll find a way. It's vive.ca. So that's V as in Victor, double E, V again.ca.
And you work globally, don't you? You're online global,
Yes, I have
like
clients
me.
everywhere.
Yeah,
We make it
beautiful.
work. Yes.
Well, thank you so much. It's been so interesting. And
Thank you.
it's always good to talk to someone who loves to take a holistic approach to this very important life transition.
Yes, absolutely. More than ever. And thank you for having this platform that allows women to have more tools. And so great to be able to have had that discussion with you.
You're welcome.